Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to Water Tanks, and today we got the pleasure of watching Sapien On God from the North American server playing in the Tier 10 British light tank that has now been in the game for about 10 days. It is of course the Manticore. Now, although a lot of people in the community have been calling this tank the mediocre. Now why? Why are they calling this tank the mediocre? Well, it has to be because apart from the size of this tank, it statistically is probably the worst Tier 10 vehicle in the game. There's a whole variety of things to really loathe about the tank that I've already covered on the channel before. But what we're really going to see here today is gameplay that will highlight, I guess, some of the strengths of this tank, but also the weaknesses of it, because a lot of people have been asking me, are the British light tanks worth it? And that's why I've really been trying to cover them as quickly as I possibly can on this channel with regards to tank reviews. But with my tank reviews on the British light tanks, I'm trying to play at least about 40 or 50 games in the tank so I can get a real good idea, and then hopefully also let you know about what modules you can skip on the vehicles so you can save a little bit of your free experience, or try and just get the most out of it that you possibly can. Alright, so let's talk about the Manticore, and immediately the worst thing about this tank. Well, the worst thing about this tank is the amount of ammunition it can carry. Even though Wargaming said in their video that it has a battleship gun, it's not really doing any more alpha damage than any of the other Tier 10 light tanks. It does 390. Battleship gun, my behind. The Sheridan, for example, has a 105mm gun that does exactly that, or you can load the 152mm derp gun on that tank, and if you're penetrating heat rounds with 152mm of penetration, you're still doing like 700 damage. And of course, most people are going to be splashing high explosive rounds on their opponents, and if you can pen the 90 or so millimeters that you have with that tank, you're doing 900 damage a shot. But of course, I don't even use the derp gun on the Sheridan. I think if I was going to use the derp gun, I'd probably want to use it on the T49, because you're going to get so much more juicy matchups, and the likelihood of penning things with a derp gun are going to be oh so much higher with a lower tier tank than with a higher tier tank. But it's not just the Sheridan that has good alpha damage on a tier 10 light tank. Something like the WZ-1321 also has 105mm with 390 alpha damage. Are there any others? Oh yeah, the French light tank with 390 autoloader. It's got a 390 alpha damage 105mm autoloader capable of delivering 3 rounds, dealing up to 1170 average damage within about 5 seconds of the first shot. So the Manticore, having this insanely low amount of ammunition, I really think that it was meant to have, or at one point Wargaming were toying around with the vehicle having higher alpha damage. Maybe they found it was overpowered with higher alpha damage, and then they tried to balance it out with the rounds. It just means that every single round you fire in this tank, you're really asking yourself whether it's worth firing. And look, I don't have a problem with that necessarily. I just think that it's a poor way to try and balance tanks by just giving them low amounts of ammunition. We've had that on the FV215B183, for example, when it used to only have 12 rounds of ammunition, then Wargaming upped it to 20, I believe. The fact that that tank has 20 rounds of ammunition that can deal 1,750 damage, and this thing has rounds that can deal, I guess if you pen Hesh rounds on it, 480 damage. But who's really going to take more than a handful of high explosive rounds on this tank? Very situational. Sure, you can load Hesh, which will have 60mm of penetration and have 480 alpha damage, but that's really for when you absolutely utterly need to finish off that artillery in a single shot, or if you get the back of a vehicle and you want to try and maximize the vehicle's terrible damage per minute. And so what I've been noticing about most Manticore drivers is that they're not even taking standard ammunition on this tank. That's right, APCR is not as standard. You have 248mm of standard AP rounds, although the shell velocity on the standard rounds is still a rather nice 1100, so really it's only AP by name, and I haven't actually gone and taken a look at the statistics of the armor-piercing shell drop-off, but that's one of the biggest holdbacks of playing a tier 10 light tank, is they usually lose about 20 to 25% of their penetration over 500 meters, unlike any other tank type at any other tier in the game, which is brutal. And you can understand why. Wargaming don't really want to have fast, hidden tanks with good combat capacity that can drive all around. But really, did they need to balance this tank by just giving it such low ammunition? And it's not just that. The damage per minute on this vehicle is the worst of any tier 10 tank in the game, at below 1,700. That's abysmal. We're talking about needing to fire a mouse for multiple minutes to be able to take it out. The Wargaming in one of their videos highlighting the strengths of the British light tanks, or their hype video, actually showed a Manticore shooting up into a lower plate of a mouse, and they tried to pull the wool over our eyes by suggesting that the Manticore is going to kill a mouse faster than the T1000 is. Well, yeah, sure, I guess if the T1000 doesn't load premium rounds, doesn't shoot up into the lower plate of the mouse, that's possibly the only position and the only situation where this tank would be able to outdo something. Somebody who refuses to fire premium rounds, and somebody who just doesn't bother to flank in a light tank and hope that the mouse just doesn't really just actually kill them. I cringed so hard, so many times watching Wargaming's video trying to hype these tanks up, when really there's nothing to get excited about. Every single time you'll see Sapien here just weighing up. It's almost, you can see he hesitates, thinking, is it really worth me firing this shot? I don't really have that much ammunition in this tank. He's penned a whopping 2 shells so far this game. I guess he's fired 6 rounds of ammunition, so he's missed 75% of his shells. But that's not a normal in World of Tanks. I don't know about you guys, but RNG happens, right? Not just with regards to the penetration on your shells, not just regards with the damage that the shell will roll, but where it will fly, where it will hit. It makes such a big difference, and when you carry such a small amount of ammunition, any kind of RNG that happens to you will be absolutely devastating. Although I can't really defend Sapien's choice of firing here, he has held back on some shells, but on other shells I feel like he's been a little bit risque, and that's resulted in him only penning 3 out of the first 8. But luckily, close quarters combat, it's hard to miss that one, and he manages to deal with the IS-7, but he's unable to defend his friend in the T-92. And thankfully, as the WZ-132A misses the shell, he's able to roll into the WZ-132A with a free shot, but it min-rolls 293. That's the lowest possible roll for this tank. And it means that he's going to have to waste a whole extra round of ammunition onto the WZ-132A here. Also, I got to pause the replay for a second there, because as the Manticore was reversing up the slope, you'll notice that it was unable to elevate the gun, and that's because, for some reason, this tank only has the same amount of elevation as it has depression, which of course is 8 degrees. Now 8 degrees of gun depression is lower than you've been used to as you've been grinding up towards the tier 10 tank, but to have 8 degrees of elevation as well, I guess it's because of the small stature of the vehicle, but it just feels incredibly awkward to not have that flexibility on a ridge line. And when you're needing to be able to get out as many rounds as you can because you've got the worst damage per minute, and also you want to make sure you can connect the rounds effectively, because if you miss them, then you're no longer going to have enough ammunition to probably get yourself through the battle, then it does get rather awkward. The Manticore seems to kind of puff out its chest a lot, right? And it makes a big noise, but when you actually see what Sapien's been able to achieve here in the first 8 minutes of this game, 2,195 damage is not very good, right? Many tier 10 light tanks on a map like this would be trying to do at least half more than that. And in a close game like this, when you manage to pick up 4 kills, way more than that, right? I'm not saying that Sapien's playing badly. That's not the case at all. He's literally almost playing this tank about as well as he possibly could. The problem is the tank itself. And even a very, very good player like Sapien is not going to be able to do as well in the Manticore as they are in other vehicles. Now that wouldn't be a problem. I don't want every single tank in the game to be absolutely legendary and be completely overpowered. But it's almost as if Wargaming have made these vehicles so statistically weak as to... I don't get it. I don't understand why. It's almost as if they don't want to make their new content exciting, that they've listened to a lot of players regarding light tanks just who don't want to see them in the game at all. I don't get it. Beautiful play here by Sapien, by the way. Gave that object 277 a perfect slip. Managed to get down below him, bait him, trick the 277 to thinking he was still below him, go up into a bush, 277 gets spotted, and he manages to finish him off. And he's managing to chew through his 1 versus 4 situation here very well indeed, with no friends left on his team. But with 5 shells of ammunition, and at least 3 of them are going to have to go into the Centurion 7-1 here, and that's if he doesn't low roll. Yeah, things are going to get a little bit squeaky. We're going to have to hope that the 705A and the T95 are low on hit points. And you just shouldn't be running out of ammunition when you've done less than 4,000 damage in a tier 10 tank. And again, not enough elevation on the Manticore there to be able to engage up against the Centurion 7-1. But luckily, that means that Sapien fully aims the shot, so he's not going to be wasting any ammo. Centurion 7-1 comes around the corner aggressively, puts one into the side of the tank, but that's going to allow Sapien to now have a flush shot into the side of the British medium tank, securing a kill and his 6th of the game. Top Gun, great impact, and with just some fantastic plays there and catching people out in the open one by one as you need to in your one versus multiple tank situations. Now Sapien's actually got himself up to a decent damage total for a tier 10 lighting, a very good damage total of 4,000 and 3,000 spotting as well, 7k combined, but with 23 seconds left on the cap, evidently both of the enemy tanks are inside the cap circle. Now this is going to be chancy. Are you really going to fire your round hit? Well, with only 12 seconds left, I don't think Sapien has a choice, does he? Let the chips fall where they may, I guess he thought right then, as he puts one into the lower plate of the 705A. I can imagine that was literally a roll of the dice, or a coin flip, 50-50 that would not have actually hit the lower plate, and then maybe another 50-50 of whether it's actually going to penetrate. Sapien tells his team, I've only got one shell left. T95, 698 hit points. He better be hoping for a fire. Come on, let's have a justice fire right now, but got to make sure you connect it first. Got to get a flush hit into the back of the tank. What now? What do you do now? You've carried your pants off. You've played almost a pixel-perfect game of World of Tanks. Although you could argue that a couple of those rounds maybe earlier were fired at a chancy situation. You've done 8,000 combined damage. You've picked up 7 kills. You've killed nearly half the enemy team in your light tank. What now, right? What can Sapien do? This is just such an incredibly frustrating moment for this tank. And this happened to me, as you'll all know if you watched my what to do when you run out of ammo in World of Tanks video. This is not an uncommon experience for you to have inside the Manticore, even if you are just using your shells fairly carefully. Luckily for me, when I was playing in my Manticore, I managed to team up with somebody on the test server, and we took down a super conqueror at the end by pincering them, and I was purely just a distraction. That's what the glorious tier 10 British light tank has been reduced to, a distraction for the enemy team to try and allow their allies to be able to carry the game. Not for them, but definitely the person who's doing the damage and putting the rounds in is doing the majority of the effort, at least in my opinion. It's just such a shame. Why do we have a new light tank line and not a wheeled light tank line going into the game so just clinically underpowered? So this is probably one of, if not the best Manticore games that I've managed to find that has been played worldwide. That's on the RU server, EU server, and the NA server. And it's just not enough, is it? It's just not enough, ladies and gents. And I was just thinking, what was going through the mind of the T95 on the enemy team, ladies and gents? Do you think he figured out that the Manticore had no ammunition? Maybe he was just happy to sit in the cap circle as he was worried that the Manticore was trying to flank him. Nevertheless, he held his nerve, and maybe if Sapien had been in a tank that weighed more than 13 tons, he could have done some kind of hero maneuver and rammed the back of the tier 9 American tank destroyer. But that certainly is a big if. Now, it's not often that I say this, but I really don't think there's anything more that Sapien could have done in this replay. He was actively trying to spot. He was holding his shell, not wasting them willy-nilly against tanks that he knew he had no chance of penetrating. Maybe he fired a few chancy shots, but when you're about to go 1 versus 1 with an IS-7 that's on half of their hit points, you can't really mess around with a tank that will require at least half a minute of continuous fire to be able to do that kind of damage. Sapien picked up the Defender, and as we mentioned, the Top Gun medal for the 7 kills, 4,899 damage. He hit every single one of his shells bar 1, and of those, 3/4 penetrated the enemy tanks. This tank takes the limited ammo loadout of a vehicle such as the Batchat just to an absolute and utter extreme. And there's just so many things about this vehicle that stop it from being an enjoyable tank to play. And while I'm personally still quite looking forward to picking up the Manticore, because as you know, I don't mind being an underdog, you got nothing to lose, right? Of the less than 1,000 people who have actually bothered to pick one of these up in the last 10 days on the European server, I haven't really found any positive comments at all. Most people are saying, don't bother with this, pick up a different light tank. There are more competitive vehicles out there. And I just really think it's a big waste of a great opportunity for wargaming to add in a whole new line of tanks that didn't have to be overpowered, but at least make them fun or novel. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about the Manticore, if you're one of the few people who have managed to pick one up so far. Really, let me know about your opinion. Have I got something to look forward to, or am I getting myself into a bit of a sticky wicket? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.